Welcome to Depths Over Noise. I'm Dr. Tony Nader. This is the podcast where we slow the conversation down to the speed at which something true can actually be said. Today's guest has spent his career studying what human beings are capable of when they get out of their own way. My guest today is Steven Kotler. Steven is a New York Times bestselling author, an award-winning journalist, and the executive director of the Flow Research Collective, where he leads peer-reviewed research on the neurobiology of peak performance. Over more than 30 years, he has done as much as any single person to take flow science from a niche idea into a working framework for athletes, executives, military operators, artists, and ordinary people trying to live at the edge of their own capacity. His books include The Art of Impossible, Stealing Fire, The Rise of Superman, Our Country, and The Devil's Dictionary. His work has consistently returned to a single observation that the same neurochemistry which allows a human being to perform at the highest level also opens the channels for connection, empathy, intuition, and care. Flow is not only a state of doing, it's a state of feeling, and it is what allows us to become more available to the world around us. Steven, welcome to Depths Over Noise. I'm grateful and delighted to have this conversation. I could say we have come at the same territory from different directions. You from the flow science and performance, I from neuroscience and the science of consciousness. So this is part an interview and part a comparison of maps. I've just finished a book called The Power of Caring, and one of its arguments is that caring sustained over time requires an inner state most people are not taught how to find. I suspect you have studied the same state. Let us see if our maps line up. But before we go anywhere, what are you thinking about most right now? Not in the books, not in the research, in the actual conversation you keep having with yourself when you wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning.
I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. The conversation I have with myself is, what's the next paragraph in the book I'm currently writing? What I do at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Wonderful. You've spent more than 30 years studying what human beings are capable of. What do you understand now about being human that maybe you did not understand at the beginning?
So that's an interesting thing. I think I spent 30 years studying the neurobiology of peak human performance. Human capacity has sort of come out of that, but I've said the same thing sort of my whole career, and I think this is the sort of the overarching lesson. If you study peak human performance, is we're all just so much more capable than we know. And the inverse of that is, if I've probably tried to be in the room when more sort of impossible feats, things that have never been done before, and this is the first time they're going to be done, whether you're talking about science and technology or human performance feats or anything like that. And the thing that always kind of sits with me is it's just ordinary people. I followed their biology. There's a blueprint our biology gives us for how to perform at our best. That's what you see over and over and again. If you're looking at life arcs, you see the hero's journey in different varieties, but you essentially see the hero's journey. And then you see sort of a foundational kind of biology that we all use to elevate our game. It's really the same blueprint, and it's really ordinary people doing the same thing over and over and over again. Interesting.
It's wonderful. You have a method, you have a system, you have books, you have studied it, its effects. And for most listeners or usual listeners who only know flow as a productive tool, like being in the zone, the focus state, would you care to say what the research has actually shown about the social and the emotional side of flow? What does flow do to the way we perceive other people?
Flow is optimal performance, right? It's a state where we feel our best and we perform our best. It's any of those moments, rapt attention, total absorption, just get so focused on what you're doing that everything else starts to melt away. When I say optimal performance, I mean physical, mental, emotional, and to your point, social. That's what we see. We see all aspects of behavior. And you can sort of go through the list, right? Physically, strength goes up, stamina goes up. Those are big catch-all categories, but most the cognitive upgrades sit in those categories. Emotionally, this is, one of the most well-established facts in psychology and neurobiology at this point, that flow underpins happiness, well-being, overall life satisfaction, meaning and purpose. We've known flow sort of amplifies the positive since, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi did foundational work on that in the 60s, 70s, and all that's happened since then, and we've got more understanding of why, where it comes from, the neurochemistry involved, neurodynamics involved, all that stuff. We started to be able to prove the inverse. This is really cool. And this amazing twin study came out of Europe that shows that flow proneness, just the ability to get into flow regularly, is neuroprotective against anxiety, depression. We're doing some really interesting work on ADHD. We're also working on TBI, diseases like ALS, neurodegenerative disorders. I've transitioned my company because the work has gotten so profound on that end. And the Flow Research Collective is now really focused on sort of studying the brain at the best, create solutions for when it's at its worst. So we're working with veterans, Navy SEALs, first responders, and the general public. Depression, anxiety, PTSD, like we're going after all of it. This may be overstepping, but I don't actually think this is overstepping, but I sort of think mental health is a solved problem. It's not a distributed solution. It's not at scale, but from a neurobiological, psychological, do we know what we're doing? Do we know how to fix this stuff? Yeah, really, really we do. Then even the neurotech is getting really advanced. So that's the stuff that I'm really also excited about, is we've known flow was super healing in this way for a very long time, but it's been very hard to prove. So people always ask, like, people will say things to me like, you've helped so many people or things along those lines. It's very sweet. And it may be true, but I didn't get in it for that. I was interested in helping plants, animals, and ecosystems, actually. Like that's where really my sympathies lies in terms of that kind of work. And so it's very hard to get anybody to care about the environment. I've tried for 30 years, animal rights, all this stuff. It's challenging. Flow is sort of like a sneak back door because you want human performance. What I get out of the equation is flow automatically expands empathy, increases what's known as environmental awareness. It's our ability to see, perceive, and care about the natural world. And so that was really what I started this work for, is those things. And as you mentioned, when we move into flow, you get access to a lot of pro-social neurochemistry. If there's groups involved, you get oxytocin, endorphins, which are pain relief and pleasure, but they're also maternal bonding and paternal bonding. You get anandamide, which is sort of a pro-social couple that makes you more open to other people and their ideas. And you get serotonin, which is a calm, right? It's calm and sort of loving. So all those chemicals show up in flow at various times during the experience. And oxytocin is only there if other people are present. It doesn't show up in solo individual flow, but if there's a group there, oxytocin always shows up. So there's, you see a lot of that, and which is where, when we work with organizations, one of the reasons they want high-speed teams and high-flow companies and things like that, but they want cooperation, collaboration, and all those sorts of things. And if you think about it, it's really funny. Nobody thinks about it this way, but for decades now, businesses have been taking their employees to ropes courses, for example. The reason they do that is because a ropes course produces flow. You're putting the group into group flow together. I mean, it's a sort of silly way to do it, and there are better ways to do it, but it's very effective. The U.S. Army's used it forever.
Indeed, it's really wonderful. The thing is, you've written that the same neurochemistry that allows peak performance also opens the channels of empathy, connection, and care. And that sentence has stayed with me.
There's a caveat there, right? And this is the caveat, this is the thing we don't understand, okay? So Laird Hamilton, the big wave surfer, said this to me years ago, decades ago. He said, look, Steven, we know flow does all this stuff, but surfers are not Buddhists, right? If flow was automatically kind of this kind of emotional growth and wisdom and whatnot that we're talking about, it's not automatic. You have to still do the work, right? It's not a free path. It's not like when we talk about flow as a driver for adult development, when you talk about children, they go through the terrible twos, whether you like it or not. Like that's going to happen, right? With adults, they don't go through the stages of development, whether you like it or not. You actually have to do the work yourself.
Yeah, it's beautiful when it's, self-centered is very important. We have to be strong. We have to be active. We have to have all these powers. And at the same time, we can say from the consciousness perspective side, that's a little bit of a different angle. What I find interesting is that the descriptions you give of flow, where the small cell goes quiet, it's time changing, texture, attention full, it's fully absorbed, and these are nearly identical to what contemplative practices such as transcendental meditation, which we teach and I practice, in particular, has described actually for decades.
I mean, this should not be news to anybody. And I'll give you a classic example. So 35 years ago, when I came into this field, I came in through the field of neurotheology. My mentor is Dr. Andrew Newberg. He was the very person to take Tibetan Buddhists and Franciscan nuns during ecstatic prayer and ecstatic meditation and put them aside in a SPECT scanner at the time, which was before fMRI, and look at what was going on in their brains. And he wanted to know, he was looking at oneness with everything, very common meditative experience, also very common in flow. I was seeing with surfers, they were like, dude, I'm one with the wave. And I called up Dr. Newberg and I was like, I got surfers. I felt it too, right? I become one with the wave or one with the mountain, or that's not uncommon. And I wanted to know, it wasn't a flow question. We didn't even know this was flow at the time. I was like, do you think the same mechanism that we've discovered in Buddhists and Franciscan nuns is working in surfers and flow in a sports context or a business context or whatever? And he said the words that changed my life. He said, I don't know. Let's find out. And that's how this started for me. We have a textbook coming out in performance neuroscience, the first major textbook in the field. It's really what we've been doing for the past 20 years. There's an article by Dr. Newberg in there, and the article is on meditation. It's on everything we've learned about meditation and human performance in 30 years. It's basically the same article. We're not speaking in contemplative wisdom tradition terms slightly anymore. We now can translate some of these things into performance language because we have the language now, but you're absolutely correct. It's the same science. Now, there are differences between meditation and flow, and there are differences between different kinds of meditation, right? Transcendental meditation is a mantra-based system predominantly, which is great, very effective. And it's a flow system. It will also make you more flow prone, right? And then there's, of course, like loving kindness, passion meditation, and they've got totally different benefits. I like to blend the two. Actually, when I train people, I train them to do a Vipassana, or like a breath practice, a focused breath practice, so like a TM practice that then goes into an open senses period and closes with a loving kindness meditation. That's the system I train people in because I just think it gets you sort of the most benefits out of it. I've spent 35 years both as a Vipassana practitioner and a Zen practitioner. So I still find Zen one of the most sophisticated sort of approaches to peak performance ever. There's stuff that the Zen tradition does that I haven't seen in other contemplative traditions. And we still study the neurobiology of this stuff, and it's gotten like, as my friend Shahar Arzi, who's at Jerusalem University, is teamed up with Moshe Adel, who's the world's leading Kabbalist expert, and they're taking 13th century archaic holistic practices that have produced really strange effects, and they're doing them inside of fMRI scanners and seeing what happens. And the research is so compelling. It's really interesting.
This is wonderful. You got us into this area of comparative methodologies of meditation. Maybe you might be surprised to know that actually transcendental meditation activates the default mode network rather than calms it down as many other techniques do. It activates it on a very, very restful state. And we know that the default mode network is also the source of creativity. And so, in fact, transcendental meditation through the research increases creativity, fast response rate afterwards, fast reaction rate. It puts an alpha state and coherence throughout the different parts of the brain. And when you look, so deeply into the default mode network, it's actually active.
Like this particular question of like, what's activating what and how exactly at this like level of granular detail is really fascinating to me. Like when this gets really interesting is when we can image both the prefrontal cortex and the default mode network and what are the deep brain structures that are more involved with sort of foundational consciousness and some of the neurochemical production.
Yeah, so like it's the medial prefrontal rather than the lateral prefrontal together, with the insula, etc. I mean, you've talked about
Yeah,
that.
it's interesting. I mean, so this is the eternal flow question, right? This is so geeky. Your listeners are probably like, what are they talking about? But like, there's a whole bunch of people say that like in flow and in meditation, it's the outside of the brain that shuts off. Like the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex does a lot of self-monitoring and self-talk. A lot of people think the inner critic lives there also. And then there's other stuff that says, no, it's in the default mode network. That's rumination. But as you pointed out, it's also imagination. And I don't think this is resolved. Like we've moved up to sort of the network dynamic level to look at things because I don't 100%, like I don't know if we have clear picture yet of what's going on. And I think what really needs to happen is a giant side-by-side sort of comparison between a lot of different meditative traditions and a lot of like, that's what I'm hoping for at some point, because I think that would be the coolest data. It's also not a new tool. It's got a long history and a lot of different contemplative practices. And I've watched psychologists trying to reinvent the wheel around this. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. But like, there's like thousands of years of data here that we could be talking about at least. So, I like to go back and forward at the same time because I think it gives you the biggest picture. And I don't think you want to discount the wisdom traditions. I think you want to investigate them cautiously, but you want to investigate everything cautiously. That's what makes us good scientists.
Beautiful. Suffice it to say, maybe for now, for our listeners, that there are different kinds of meditation. We can't lump them in all as one.
Now, yeah, totally.
We have the tendency to say everything is mindfulness, but there are completely different things. It's as if you have white powder and you cannot say, oh, what is it? For those listeners who don't know the flow, actually, Steven wonderfully describes it in his books. And he describes flow in his beginning as an optimal state of consciousness. So people think it's performance, it's the body, etc. And the body is anything, but the main definition is optimal state of consciousness. So we're talking about how the mind is once the whole mind and body integration is there. Tell us about your work on intuition, since we're going into these topics. What surprised you most as you went deeper into it? How does intuition relate, for example, to caring, to feeling, etc.?
That's an interesting question. I came into intuition because Danny Kahneman, the late Dr. Kahneman, who won a Nobel Prize for creating behavioral economics and basically telling the world that you shouldn't trust your intuition. And Danny and I had a 10, 15-year argument because in flow, there's overwhelming evidence that intuition gets louder, clearer, stunningly accurate. So there's this weird dynamic there. Like that's really where that's where this work started for me. I just got like tired of arguing with him. And, if you're going to go up against another laureate, you better break data. So like that's where all this work sort of came from. We've published a couple of papers, one in the Journal of Consciousness Studies, one in, I want to say Neuroscience and Biobehavior Reviews on flow and intuition and the neurodynamics of intuition. And what I think the most interesting thing that I'm seeing, first of all, we've got a very accurate map, really, of how it evolved, where it comes from, how it functions in the brain. You asked about like caring and feeling and empathy. It's, I mean, in a weird way, that's sort of a group flow brain entrainment synchrony question. And sort of, we know all those things, right? We know that when we train with other people, there's sort of this like commingling intuition. You start finishing each other's sentences. It's pattern matching at a very extreme level between individuals. I certainly think when it sort of comes to that, we often divide intimacy in that way, right? When we're having like really like when we're with one another and you're sort of sharing the same intuition, it says that feels like intimacy. whether it's intimacy with a spouse, a friend, could be a god. You know what I mean? But I think that, like, I don't know, Tony, but you asked the question. I was like, I sort of think that's what we mean by intimacy. And the new book is, by the way, actually, We Are as Gods, right? This is the latest book. This is sort of flow, intuition. So a lot of my work on cutting edge technology, but it's really a guidebook. It says, We Are as Gods, a survival guide for the age of abundance. So we're looking at the question of how do we use, the way I like to describe it is, and I think this is funny in a sense, the soft skills of the 20th century, flow, intuition, creativity, awareness, cooperation, collaboration, I go on, critical thinking even. These are hard skills in the 21st century. These are sort of fundamental survival, thriving skills. And the responsibility on ourselves, because the world is moving so quickly, because we're in the middle of the largest mental health crisis in history because of our technology and some other things, the onus on ourselves to have the tools, flow, mindfulness, mindset, all these things are really mandatory. I think that's both like an incredible challenge, but like a wonderful opportunity. I like the version of us, of humanity, that comes out the other end of it.
It's wonderful. I'm sure you're very familiar with the collective neuroscience that's coming up with, bats having synchronicity between them when they fly together, and even people, when they're sitting and discussing the same topics, they have even coherence in their brain waves.
I should tell you about this. You're going to get really happy. Let me tell you, with We Are as Gods, the new book, you asked a little about what I was thinking about, and let me walk you into this idea because you're going to like the whole thing. So,
wonderful.
This is my fourth book with Peter Diamandis. We write about accelerating technology and sort of how to prepare for the future. When we come into a book, Peter's always trying to solve a problem, and I'm always trying to solve a problem. And where do they meet? That's usually where the book is. The problem I was trying to solve was cooperation at scale. It struck me that most of the giant problems of the 21st century, whether it's manufactured pandemics or rogue AI or climate change or take your pick, the solutions are cooperation at scale. That was sort of a silly phrase pre-COVID, because if you sort of think about the world, the only time we've ever cooperated at scale is when there's either a war or a sporting event. Otherwise, we don't do it, right? And so then COVID happened, and we had the fastest vaccine development in history. Technologically enabled, global researchers got together. We had 17 different vaccines built globally in record time at like record low cost. And that's all amazing. And then simultaneously, and this is the point I wanted to make, so that happens, we were like, oh, wow, there's a model now. We've seen cooperation at scale, and we've seen how new technology can help with that. Simultaneously, so my chief science officer at the Flow Research Collective is Dr. Michael Menino. Michael built a company that I'm on the board of called Synergy, and you could send us a Zoom call. You have a Zoom meeting with your team, Tony. You can send us the Zoom call using AI semantic analysis, pupillometry, so reading the size of your pupils. We will use all kinds of microexpressions, face reading, microexpressions, and there's a vein in your forehead that you can get HRV and blood flow and a whole bunch of stuff off of. I'm using infrared. We can give you real-time analysis of trust, psychological safety, brain entrainment, synchrony, and group flow proneness. And with incredible accuracy, brain entrainment, whether you're dealing with cooperation at scale, society-wise, or a couple trying to get along, that's the metric you care about the most. Body-brain synchrony is really the metric that matters. And the frontier of neuroscience, as you pointed out, is things like hyperscanning, multiple brains, empathy. Like this is all, right? This is really neat stuff. And so I think this is literally the immediate future. And it's one of the things we talked a lot about in We Are as Gods, because it's, the questions that you seem to be poking at about cooperation, collaboration, empathy, caring, these are core questions in the 21st century, I think.
That's wonderful. I look forward to the book and to the further research. It's amazing. If we move to the idea of, let's say that the highest expression of human capacity is not necessarily raw ability, but the ability in service of something worth caring. This takes us into something you discuss about about goal and purpose and worth caring about things. So flow, intuition, neurobiology, and cooperation, they all converge in the human being who has decided what is worth their attention. So we have the highest performers you have studied. What did they teach you about what they choose to care about?
Well, we know humans perform best with 3 levels of goals. Clear daily goals, like a daily to-do list, then what are known as high hard goals. These are like 3 to 5 year goals, and then a mission or purpose, right? What's interesting, Tony, is the way you phrased it, it makes it sound selfless. And it's not. And that's the thing that people miss here. The reason you want to help others, like there's a lot of moral reasons to want to help others and ethical reasons, but from a performance standpoint, the reason you care is you get access to more feel good, performance enhancing neurochemistry, right? All the pro-social chemistry. When you're talking about passion, if I'm passionate, that means I have access to dopamine and norepinephrine. They're motivating. They feel good. That's the cocktail that is romantic love. That's created countries and moved continents, right? Like it's no small thing, but you add in endorphins and oxytocin, and like that's a hell of a lot of performance enhancing pro-social chemistry. So from a purely selfish standpoint, you want a purpose that unlocks a whole bunch more of you. I think today, if you're doing business in the world and you want to attract talent wants a mission. Talent wants their work to matter, and they don't want to do stupid stuff. I mean, I love that. Nothing was more annoying to me when there was an app resolution and you meet kids and they're like, I want to build the next Angry Birds. And I'm like, you are just wasting your life. Go away, do something. So,
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
In our country, you take a particular position. You did not say aging is fine, here is how to cope. You said the second half of life is a new developmental stage with its own unlocks. What did you find that surprised you most, and what does it mean for how we think about caring for ourselves over the long run?
Good question. So, a couple big ideas. One was the first was, I grew up in a world where we were told that aging was essentially like all of our skills are going to rot over time. There's nothing you can do about it. That was what we were told. That was the aging I grew up in. And the truth, like the neurobiology of it, is that all of our skills are use it or lose it skills. So if you never stop using them, you can advance them much later in life than anybody even knew. The other thing is, when we move into our 40s and 50s, you actually get access to whole new levels of cognitive superpowers, wisdom, intelligence, and creativity well above baseline. It's because the two halves of the brain start talking to each other in a cooperative fashion in the late 40s and 50s. There's sort of like, you have to do certain things to make this happen, to make sure you go through the gateways to get here. We now know flow plays such a really significant role in longevity. We've got hard data at this point. And then there's, really weird little things that like openness to experience tends to crash 2 years before you die. How's that for a reason to stay curious? Right?
Right. It's amazing because, one can say, based on what you said and you described, that with age, really what declines is the noise. And I come back to this because our title is Depth Over Noise. And at the beginning, one is excited, wants to do things, and there is a lot of noise. But when you have accumulated, maturity and knowledge, what can increase if we know how to cultivate it is actually clarity, depth, and a particular kind of, in a sense, also effortlessness. And your peak performance aging work and that view, I think, are pointing to the same direction, even from very different points, from different angles. So we have discussed, you've written about altruism, cooperation. We just discussed it, how the self kind of is there and is rewarded, but the small self leads to a bigger self. We talked about unity. You and your wife run a sanctuary in New Mexico for hospice and special need dogs. That kind of caring is daily, exhausting, often unrewarded. What have the dogs taught you that the research did not?
Well, we moved out of New Mexico. We now are in sort of the Nevada side of Tahoe, but the sanctuary came with us. We have done hospice care and special needs care, mostly end of life care, terminally ill dogs and late stage dogs, about 1,500 dogs in the 20 years that we've done this work. What haven't they taught me seriously is a really crazy question. The one thing I will say, because it's apropos, and I wrote about this in A Small Furry Prayer, which is the book I sort of wrote about our work. One of the things that's really interesting. So almost all canine research has been done on like people with dogs, right? Like dogs study their dogs kind of thing. But dogs evolved to live in big packs of dogs, small groups of humans, age-free, right? That's the life we provide for them. So we see all this behavior that doesn't show up in the scientific literature. Empathy, for example, at a really extreme level. So I'll give you a simple example. We feed our dogs chicken seed style. We scatter their food. They share food. So first of all, nobody does that with dogs, but our dogs will share food. They eat as a pack, sharing food. And when we have new, weaker dogs that come into the pack, the big dogs will stand between them and the rest of the pack to make sure they get enough to eat. So
Wow.
We see really crazy empathic behavior sometimes in our dogs. Really neat. I always say that one of the things you learn with packs of dogs is humans are pretty simple machines. We really are. We like to think we're super complicated. We've got 4 knobs: approach, avoid, valence, and arousal. That's all human behavior. You click those 4 knobs and you have humans. So a lot of behavior that you think is so human, like, oh, this would never show up in another species. When you actually have packs and live with a pack, you see that behavior all the time. The question was, where the hell did our humanity come? Our pro-social behavior, caring for the young, caring for the elders, like taking care of one another. If you go into chimps, primates, you don't see this behavior at all. And so the question was, where the hell did it come from? So 40 to 50,000 years ago, humans began cohabitating with wolves. We did it because they first of all, it started, they would come close to human camps because they would want our garbage piles. But when you clean up garbage around a human settlement, that's sanitation. You get healthier humans. That's an evolutionary driver. Then the dogs came in closer and they became our alarms, right? Our burglar alarms. And then our bed warmers. And then we started co-hunting with them. This is one of the reasons we think group flow evolved, is because we co-hunted with wolves. We're going after buffalo and elephant and things like that. Not elephant, that's an exaggeration, but buffalo and woolly mammoths and whatnot. And there's no language. So you need high-speed pattern recognition to be able to coordinate behavior. That's one of the reasons we think group flow got forward. But the new thinking of where our humanity came from is this driver. So all of our humanity, our empathy, our caring, our pro-social behavior, we actually learned it from dogs. It's not even innately in us. We got it from the dogs, the canine, which I think is amazing. We learned it from wolves.
That's wonderful. Whichever way we learn it, and that's great
Right.
to have it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you for your work, for your honesty in this conversation, and for spending 30 years pointing at something the rest of the culture is only beginning to understand. So to everyone listening, flow, caring, connection, the inner ground beneath all of them, these are not separate territories. They are different doors into the same room. Whichever door you choose, walk through it. Until next time on Depths Over Noise. What we just heard from Steven Kotler are highlights about how 2 long bodies of research, his own flow and peak performance, mind on consciousness and the ancient transcendental meditation technique, meet, and how they have arrived at the same essential observation by very different roads. 3 things from his work landed most deeply for me. The first is the scope of what flow actually is and what it actually does. Flow is not just productivity. The same neurochemistry that allows a human being to perform at the highest levels also opens the channels for empathy, connection, intuition, and care. Steven's lab and his work indicate that flow overrides PTSD, overrides burnout, and is neuroprotective against anxiety, depression, even schizophrenia. Transcendental meditation technique has been shown through peer-reviewed studies to be effective in these conditions. Steve went so far as to say that mental health is essentially a solved problem at the neurobiological level. The techniques are simply not distributed at scale. That is the problem. The second is the convergence between flow science and contemplative traditions. Steven told the story. 30 years ago, he asked his mentor, Dr. Andrew Newberg, whether the same neural mechanisms Newberg had been studying in Tibetan Buddhists and Franciscan nuns might also be working in surfers when they are in flow. Newberger's answer was, "I don't know. Let's find out." 30 years later, the answer is yes. The same science, the mystic in deep meditation, the surfer one with the wave, the athlete in the zone, the contemplative in deep silence, these are not separate phenomena. They are the same underlying state reached through different doors. And that convergence is one of the quietest and most powerful confirmations of what the contemplative traditions, transcendental meditation in particular, have always claimed. The third is the story he closed with, about where our humanity might have come from. 40 to 50,000 years ago, humans began cohabitating with wolves. There is an idea that human pro-social behavior or empathy was not inherited from our primate ancestors. Humans seem to have developed it when they lived with wolves. Steven and his wife have run a sanctuary for terminally ill and special needs dogs for 20 years, working with about 1,500 dogs in that time. He has watched daily pro-social behavior and the scientific literature that mostly does not capture that behavior. His conclusion was humbling. Humans may have learned how to care. They have learned out caring from another species. And we have three highlights we take from Steven's conversation. First, caring is not depletion. It is one of the most performance-enhancing states a human being can enter. Steven put this point bluntly. The reason high performers want a mission greater than themselves is not pure altruism. It is that purpose unlocks the pro-social neurochemistry that produces the highest sustained capacity for action. This is exactly the argument the power of caring makes from the contemplative side, the contemplative traditions. Caring done from a settled place lifts the giver as much as the receiver. Steven has shown with neurobiology that this is not a metaphor, it is the way the system actually works. Second, 2 long research programs are now converging on the same observation. Flow science and the science of meditation. They are pointing at the same truth, that there is a level of human integration in which excellence, empathy, intuition, and presence are not different capacities, but different expressions of one underlying state. And third, the survival framing of our moment. Steven made the observation that the soft skills of the 20th century, flow, intuition, awareness, empathy, cooperation, even critical thinking, are the hard skills of the 21st. As artificial intelligence absorbs more of what human beings used to do for a living, what remains uniquely human becomes the most valuable thing on earth. Caring is at the center of that. The book, The Power of Caring, argues, and Steven's research confirms in different language, that the people who will do well in the next several decades are the people who have cultivated the capacity that no machine can replicate. To everyone listening, flow, caring, connection, the inner ground beneath all of them, these are not separate territories. They are different doors into the same room. Whichever door you choose, walk through it. Steven, thank you for your work, for your honesty, and for reminding us in the gentlest possible way that an aspect of our humanity may have been a gift from nature through creatures we tend to consider beneath us.